one of the most influential first-person shooters of all time is turning 20 years old. On November 19th, 1998, 20 years ago, Half-Life was released to critical acclaim. This instant success set a new standard for first-person shooters in 1998. Though it's a story told very often, there's no way that I can say that which hasn't already been said about the release of Half-Life. How it slayed that which was the Mighty Doom clone, and how it took the Quake engine and reconstructed it to tell a story in ways that they were not previously told. While in all truth, Half-Life does have some major flaws that many overlook simply because it was so influential, but in no way do a few oddities caused by the incredibly outdated and limited engine and weird AI make it a bad game. But what the hell? I didn't come here to talk about Half-Life 1, I'm here to talk about Half-Life 2. So, instead, how about we bump that release date from 20 years ago down to 14 years ago. Still quite a long time ago. I present to you my favorite game of all time. I've had many videos on some of my favorite games, Mirror's Edge and Black Ops definitely being in my top 10, but this takes it all the way up to number 1. There's a few reasons why I find this game to be so great, and this is going to be a long video, so I'm going to be splitting this video up into sections similar to my Black Ops video. Take yourself back to 2003. You've just played games like Max Payne and Morrowind. And so E3 2003 rolls around. Games like Call of Duty and Max Payne 2 are announced. Both look fairly alright graphically for the time, but look fairly outdated today. 2003 was a fairly small year, much smaller than the following year 2004, but there was one thing that really stood out.
This next segment will introduce you to Alex, one of your friends in Half-Life 2, and reintroduce Dr. Fire, one of the scientists from Black Mesa.
Gordon, snap out of it.
Instantly, it's easy to tell that this is something more ambitious than just a sequel to a previous game, or another 2000s war game. The atmosphere heard in the areas shown in the demo, the obviously alien structures, creatures, and vehicles seen leave much to the imagination. Seeing giant tripod-like armored creatures with laser cannons and HMGs, gunships that look like organic marine creatures that have been armored and weaponized, the gigantic citadel looming over a city set ablaze by rebellion, all beautiful artistic scenes and creatures. This was made before much of the lore behind Half-Life 2 was available to fans. Also, one of the main features that really wowed onlookers, the absolutely groundbreaking physics seen throughout the demo in every place possible. You really have to take yourself back to 2003 to understand it. In many games, in-depth physics were a rarity. Most games would leave physics off to the side. Boxes were immovable objects. Plywood was a weak piece of color to hide behind. A trash can was another immovable object. But in Half-Life 2, these objects could either easily be broken with a few bullets, or be moved using explosives and gravity-defying weaponry. There are many showcases of just what the Source engine paired with the Havoc physics engine were capable of. Explosions sending debris flying towards zombies at high speeds, spinning blades cutting zombies clean in half, swinging steel beams killing Combine soldiers, much improved facial animations, bump maps, incredible lighting and textures, etc. All of this combined to make a very immersive experience, and what I definitely consider to be the first truly realistic looking game. But this isn't the end of Half-Life 2's pre-production. In reality, there were many interesting ideas thrown around in the earlier development of Half-Life 2.
Why did you set me on fire? You are such an asshole! Why would you do this to me? Holy fuck, get your free TV! Get your free TV! Do not talk shit about the beta!
I need cover! Hang on, Peters, we're gonna get you out of there!
Development of Half-Life 2 began soon after the release of Half-Life 1. The development of the Source engine began very quickly. Remember, Half-Life 2 was released 6 years after Half-Life 1, so the development of the Source engine took center stage. The Source engine was very advanced for its time. Even today, the use of the Source engine isn't rare. Many mistake the Source engine as the physics engine, when in reality the Havoc engine handles the physics. What the Source engine actually does is still quite impressive though. The Source engine handles many things like facial animations, bump maps, level development, map topography, lighting, etc., all of which were very advanced for the early 2000s. Facial animations and lighting being incredibly impressive to audiences. Even if Valve didn't develop the Havoc physics engine, Half-Life 2 was not the first, but one of the first to properly take advantage of the engine's physics capabilities. Newer games like Insurgency and Day of Infamy use the Source engine, though by now it's beginning to show its age, and with that, Valve is now quote-unquote developing the Source 2 engine. What was so interesting about the actual early development version of Half-Life 2? What about it inspired a whole community around recovering levels, assets, voice lines, and cut plot developments? Much of what was cut from the final game was completely different from the release version of the game. Many of the combat sequences seen in cut content focused more on the struggle of the rebels fighting against the Combine. Rebels would use makeshift weaponry like Molotov cocktails to destroy armored vehicles, throw rocks at flying scanners, and use weapons picked from their abusers. Later, things like tanks are sent in, and the rebels fight back with rocket launchers and Molotovs. Some of the most interesting content being the beautiful dystopian tyrannical cities, cut enemies and weapons, and cut set pieces, like rushing down an alley alongside rebels laying down suppressive fire on a sniper, or exiting a plane that has crashed into a building and making your way down the remains of the building while fighting Combine. Many of these cut parts of the game interested people very much. There's a whole community around recreating levels seen in press releases of the game before the game released based off of existing levels and visuals from the videos and images alone. Not only were there many cool sequences and items cut from the game, many lines of dialogue that better explain the existence of the retcon characters and plot of the game were cut. Even if those sequences and items were interesting, many were unfinished and didn't have much of a place in the game. For instance, many playtesters felt there were way too many automatic firearms in the game, and these sequences that I just talked about were unpolished graphically and gameplay-wise. One of the main disappointments of Half-Life 2 is the completely missing diversity in enemies. After Ravenholm, you almost strictly fight Combine soldiers and gunships. Well, I'm not gonna go and say that the Combine needed to use their full arsenal or anything, but the Combine that are there lack any type of design other than the Nova Prospect guards and shotgun soldiers. In the book Raising the Bar, you see different suit designs for Combine, all with different insignias, and some with different helmets on even. But in the game, all of them wear the same suits, and at most, the colors change from blue to dark blue or to orange. I can already think of several places in which suits can be changed up, like a skin specific to Combine who jump out of dropships, or to differentiate those who use SMGs and AR-2 pulse rifles. It's honestly pretty cheap how literally every Combine soldier, except for 2 different variants, had the exact same suits, especially when the suits seen in concept art and existing ones already look so fucking cool. The bulky chestplate and knee pads blend together so well already. So, up to this point I've only talked about that which preceded Half-Life 2, but what is actually there in Half-Life 2 is great on its own. While Half-Life 2 was originally set to release in September of 2003, the game was delayed to October of 2004. Here, Half-Life 2, as similar to how Half-Life 1 was delayed, went through many changes due to the game being in a state that Valve was not proud of. During this period of a year, large amounts of content were cut, and much of the game was polished to meet Valve's approval. What was cut may have been interesting, but what was left was even more. You started off in the dystopian City 17, where every citizen is treated equally. Equally garbage. Citizens are pushed around by their overseers, have basic human rights taken away from them, are fed lackluster rations, and are completely stripped of any privacy at all. Apartment raids are not just common, they're daily occurrences. You, Gordon Freeman, a completely silent protagonist, step off of a train and instantly are introduced to the atmosphere of City 17. You can hear the distant alarms. You see Dr. Breen, the overseer of City 17, making an announcement through a giant screen. Metro cops pushing citizens around. And you're there with no idea where to go. You continue on and eventually meet up with Barney, an undercover rebel working as a civil protection officer who you also happen to remember as a security guard from Black Mesa. After meeting with Barney, he instructs you to make your way to Dr. Kleiner's lab, a small building where Dr. Kleiner, a scientist from Black Mesa who has a secret laboratory where he experiments with teleportation and is relatively free from the Combine disturbing him. Here, you meet a new friend, who will later be your sidekick, Alex Vance. With all of these characters together, you're introduced to who they are. Barney hates pests, has a charming voice and personality, and is a good shot. Kleiner is an optimistic scientist who finds alien life more fascinating than threatening. Alex is strong and capable, yet not shoved down your throat like a more modern game would likely do. And Eli Vance, Alex's father, who is also a scientist at Black Mesa, though he's much more realistic than Dr. Kleiner. You'll meet with these characters a few times throughout the game, and their character dynamic is charming and nice, with Barney oftentimes getting in arguments with Kleiner about his pet head crab, Alex being happy with her father, Kleiner getting into trouble with his pet, and Gordon sitting back and remaining completely silent. The atmosphere of the game is some of the greatest of all time. The sounds of alarms, announcements going over screens, and radio chatter coming from the Metro cops in City 17. The industrial and spooky sounds coming from Ravenholm. The security cameras showing scenes of humans being turned into transhumans with modified internal systems to be used as Combine soldiers. Misbehaving citizens being stripped of absolutely anything that makes them human and being used as slaves for the Combine. And the Combine guards struggling against antlions invading the facility in Nova Prospect. The alarms sounding throughout City 17 as the rebels finally begin their revolution against City 17, and the distant gunshots. Citizens comforting each other, just hoping for life to return to normal. It all immerses you in the hopelessness of the world. If you've watched my past videos, you'll know that I feel that a good soundtrack can help tie together a good gameplay experience and make it great. And the Half-Life series is no stranger to good music. The first Half-Life game also featured a great soundtrack that blended well with the gameplay and levels. Half-Life 2 also features a great soundtrack, one that I feel is even better than the one seen in Half-Life 1. In Half-Life 2, the soundtrack produced by Kelly Bailey is heard somewhat rarely, but those moments in which they are heard can really be a cherry on top for already fun battles. There's certain tracks that really stand out from others. Others are meant to add more excitement to scenes in the game, like when you first walk out in the streets of City 17 as the rebels are beginning their revolution. Alex's robot companion Dog accompanies you and destroys a Combine APC as one of the best songs of the soundtrack goes on in the background. One of the most impressive parts of Half-Life 2 today is the seamless transition from level to level, one of the main things that the game inherited from its predecessor. Every time you meet a different level, you aren't met by a cutscene or a sudden skip in time or a drastic change in landscape. Every change in level properly transitions from one area to the next, like entering Water Hazard, an area filled with toxic waste, by going through the canals of City 17, or entering Nova Prospect after going on a long path and going through a small, concealed pipe, entering the Citadel through an underground entrance that bypasses the walls of the structure. Every level seems like you're genuinely going from point A to point B. Not only do the levels transition very well, the levels themselves are very diverse, ranging from an Eastern European city, an abandoned mining town, coastal towns, a dark prison, and an alien structure. This is one of the main things that I love about Half-Life 2 so much. Once you've traversed all these different locations, the ending feels like the end of a journey. From escaping an oppressive city, revolting against that same city, and destroying the flagship structure of your oppressors. Not so similar to Half-Life 1, most of the plot development happens on-screen. Half-Life 2 takes a more cutscene approach to things, while not making full-scale cinematics. Some may argue that this is a bad thing, but I would say this is even more impressive. The scenes maintain the full quality of a cutscene, with things like the animation of the source engine and the facial animation systems all in real time while keeping the player in full control. While these scenes can be boring whenever playing through the game again, the game gives you small things to toy with like miniature teleporters and machines, and if you really don't care, skipping these parts is as easy as opening the console, activating cheats, and typing host_timescale5. The actual plot of Half-Life 2 is very interesting. Half-Life 1 establishes that there will be a sequel and that it will not be anything like the first. And Half-Life 2 is most definitely nothing like the first. Most of the characters are retconned, and the scale is taken from a science facility to a sizable 2-day long journey throughout Eastern Europe. After accepting the G-Man's offer and working with him, you're put into stasis for an uncertain amount of time. Fans have speculated that the time between the Black Mesa incident and the second game is around 20 years. G-Man finally releases you from stasis, gives you a talk, and sits you onto a train inbound for City 17. Here, people are visibly confused as to how you got onto that train, but ignore it and continue on. From here, the presence of the Combine is immediately noticeable. The monolithic Citadel Tower, which is the main structure of the Combine looming over the city, the human figures in strange armored suits wearing gas masks commanding citizens, the Vortigaunt slave soldiers from Half-Life 1 have been enslaved by the Combine, though are now helping the Resistance. You can immediately tell that there is more going on than just a dystopia. This isn't just a dictatorship, this is an alien tyranny. Over the journey you partake in throughout Eastern Europe, you learn more about the Combine. Though the Combine are never explained to you through blank exposition. The Combine are never really explained up front at all, really, besides the fact that they are named the Combine. You're left to learn about them on your own. The fact that you are left to learn about the Combine on your own is one of the best parts. One of the worst ways to tell a story is by straight explaining everything up front without allowing the one hearing it to experience it for themselves. The player learns of the Combine by paying attention. Newspaper headlines detailing of the 7-Hour War, a war which took place sometime after the Black Mesa incident, which involved the Combine exploiting a phenomenon that occurred after the Black Mesa incident called portal storms. These portal storms involve portals randomly opening and closing, teleporting in alien creatures. Accompanied by these storms, a blue wave and shock waves that cause damages to many structures. During the 7-Hour War, the humans fought against their invaders fiercely with all the power possible, though no matter of fierceness would be enough. The combined powers of the entire world couldn't overpower the Universal Union's combined multi-dimensional army of synths, biomechanical creatures, enslaved soldiers from other worlds, and many other things not described. Announcements describe transhuman transformations and permanent off-world assignment, in which particular incidents of misbehavior result in humans being forcefully taken off of Earth and stationed somewhere else in the multitude of universes controlled by the Combine. Announcements also mention one of the most foreboding consequences of the Combine's rule of Earth, the suppression field. The suppression field completely eliminates any form of human reproduction, resulting in the eventual complete extinction of all humanity if such suppression field continues. Not only this, but also to completely destroy any fun, any sexual act is punished harshly if spotted. You can get a glimpse of the Combine homeworld if you're paying attention whenever Dr. Breen attempts to escape the Citadel before it explodes. All you can see are several large structures against an orange sky. Your main goal is to destroy the Combine oppressors and take Earth back for humanity. After working with your allies you meet earlier in the game to strike the Nova Prospekt Combine base, the rebel groups of City 17 see this blow to the Combine as a signal to begin the revolt. After taking down Nova Prospekt, Gordon Freeman and Alex are teleported back to Kleiner's lab, but due to Kleiner's teleporter still being experimental, the teleport results in Freeman and Alex being in some form of stasis for a whole week, and the two never see the beginning of the revolution. Freeman returns to see the height of the revolt, citizens tearing down structures, striders walking the streets, civil protection attempting to hold out until Combine soldiers arrive to back them up. After fighting through the city, Freeman arrives at an opening in which he can enter the Citadel and makes his entrance. From here, he gets an upgrade to the gravity gun which supercharges it. This makes the last hour of the game a fun brief period of being ridiculously overpowered, though still being challenging. Here in this last hour, you have a brief moment of all being lost. Dr. Breen has Freeman, Alex, and Eli all held captive before Dr. Mossman, a captured scientist from Black Mesa East, betrays Dr. Breen and lets them free. From here, Breen runs away to get to the Combine teleporter. You get the gravity gun back, and reach the Combine's one source of energy for their inefficient teleporter. The Dark Fusion reactor is destroyed, leaving Breen with nowhere to go. After the destruction of the fusion reactor, Alex rushes onto the platform Freeman stands on, and a large explosion happens, Though before it can affect Gordon Freeman, the G-Man pulls him into stasis. What happens next is left at a cliffhanger, and players would find themselves having to wait another 2 years to find out how the story continued in Half-Life 2 Episode 1. Half-Life 2 Episode 1 begins with the Vortigaunts displaying a power that has not been seen previously. They interrupt the G-Man and save Gordon from stasis, and Alex from certain death. After this, you and Alex make it away from the remains of the Citadel and continue the fight alongside the rebels. One of the things that is made clear soon is that with the destruction of the Citadel, the suppression field has been deactivated. As soon as Dr. Kleiner learns of this, he makes an announcement basically telling the people to get it on. Which, I mean, come on dude. The rebels are still busy, rebelling, which would be an awful condition to raise a child in. You're informed that a gigantic explosion that would signal the opening of a portal to the Combine homeworld was imminent, and that as many people as possible would need to flee from City 17 as soon as possible.
Come on, Gordon, crank that thing.
During your time before departure, you're introduced to the Borealis, a ship with teleportation technology that was developed by Aperture Science. This ship is being hunted down by the Combine, and you're tasked with saving the ship for the rebels after your current objective. You're sent onto a train going from City 17 to the White Forest Rebel base, where a research facility is located. On the way there, the Citadel finally explodes, sending the Combine advisors running, and the Combine super portal opens. The super portal is not immediately functional, and must develop fully until Combine troops can begin flooding in through the portal. You're left with another cliffhanger until 2007. Half-Life 2 Episode 2 was released to almost absolute praise from any of those who already liked Half-Life 2. It took all of the good things brought by Half-Life 2 and Episode 1 and made them even better. Episode 2 brought graphical improvements, AI improvements, and just all around made for a great climax to the series. You awaken on a crashed train and find your way off, and eventually meet Alex, and you're tasked with returning the coordinates of the Combine super portal to the White Forest Rebel base. This is where you meet one of the most awe-inspiring sights in the entire series. You and Alex stand while watching the burning remains of City 17, the Combine super portal in its infancy coming from the wreckage of the Citadel. Eli inquires that if the portal is not shut down, that
if it attains full strength,
It'll be the 7-hour war all over again. Except this time we won't last 7 minutes.
After viewing this scene, a portal storm is felt and knocks down the remains of the bridge that Gordon just found his way out of. After this, you find yourself and Alex returning to their original goal of getting to the White Forest Rebel base. During your trip, Freeman and Alex are stopped at a building, and Freeman must do a puzzle. At the end of this puzzle, you meet back with Alex. And then suddenly, Alex is attacked by a hunter, a new enemy introduced in Episode 2. Gordon is not in a position to help, and Alex is mortally wounded after being impaled in the stomach. This is where Episode 2 takes a bit of a dive, pun intended. And you go underground to a rebel outpost where Vortigaunts can heal Alex using their fucking Vortigaunt stuff, but not before you have to go on a fairly long fetch quest. Once you get some fucking glowing thing for the Vortigaunts, you give it back to them and they heal Alex, but this takes away their power from keeping the G-Man from Gordon. This is where G-Man takes the opportunity to take Freeman into his hands for a few minutes and give another speech. This time he relays that for the actions of your friends, the Vortigaunts, there will be unforeseen consequences, a reference to Chapter 1 in Half-Life 1. On your way, you also have your first encounter with a Combine advisor, a vicious precedent for what is to come. Once you make it to the White Forest Rebel base, you deliver the coordinates of the Citadel super portal to Dr. Magnuson, the lead researcher of the base. Right before the nuclear rocket is launched at the super portal, Eli informs you that you must get to the Borealis as soon as possible and destroy it. Once the rocket hits the portal explodes and it shuts completely. You, Alex, and Eli head to a hangar which houses a helicopter quickly as it is a matter of time before the Combine take the Borealis. Half-Life 2 has one last trick up its sleeve. Everything is happy as can be, the super portal has just been destroyed, and from here on the rebels can begin taking the revolution to other areas. And as soon as everything is at its happiest, 2 Combine advisors enter, restrain all 3 of you, and kill Eli right in front of you and his daughter. This leaves Half-Life 2 Episode 2 on yet another cliffhanger all the way until... wait. Episode 3 was never released, even though Gabe Newell had made several statements that the game was supposed to be released sometime before 2010, and a 4th episode made by a different developer was even in the works, but both were quietly cancelled for unknown reasons. There was no concrete reason ever given as why, but how is quite evident. One of the saddest parts of knowing the fact that an official Episode 3 is most likely never going to happen is that this video would be completely different if that weren't true. Instead, the Half-Life series never quite got a concrete end. Obviously, most people by now know how the game would have played out, but I don't think anyone would disagree that Half-Life only deserves to be finished off the same way it began, as a video game. Not just a fanfiction, not a movie, not a Telltale game, a fully functional first-person shooter.